Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me tonight are of course my two co-hosts who have been graciously helping me out over the last several weeks, John Strohbehn and John Riggins. And also my guest tonight's going to be Mike Bara, who is a returning guest, and quite frankly, he's always a pleasure. He's the co-author of, I want to say it's either Dark Secrets or Dark Missions of NASA that was wrote with him and Richard Hoagland, and I keep getting the title of that particular book mixed up, so I'm going to get him to correct me on it here in a minute. But the ones I don't mix up is the ones that he's authored himself, The Choice, and also he's authored Ancient Aliens on the Moon and Ancient Aliens on Mars, which we'll be talking about tonight, which I believe are his most recent books. And he tells me that Ancient Aliens on Mars is not out yet, but he can share a little bit about it. I'm not sure as to how much. And I believe that Ancient Aliens on the Moon is out. And I think it's going to be a very interesting evening. This is a man that has a lot of information to offer. Him and Hoagland have both done a ton of research work about the monuments on Mars and crystal cities. I think it is on Mars and the Moon, or one or the other. And I haven't read it in a while, so I'm probably getting mixed up. So I'm going to let him correct me on any mistakes that I make. But right now, why don't we bring him into the conversation and get the ball on the road. So, Mike, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Royce. I was just sitting here watching myself on the Ancient Aliens marathon all day long. There's nothing that strokes your ego more than watching yourself on TV. Let me just tell you.
I really enjoyed watching that. Me and my son Royce watched all of those episodes both times around. And I thought you did excellent work in that one. But I'm afraid I may not have done such a excellent job with the book that you and Hoagland were co-authors on. Was that Dark Missions or Dark Secrets or...
It is Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA. And that was a book Richard and I wrote in 2007. And then in 2010, I wrote The Choice, which is about, using conscious thought to use the physics of the mind, the physics of the real physics of the universe to change the outcome, to change the reality of the 2012 era that we're going to be in for the next, probably 10 years still of change. And then the new book is Ancient Aliens on the Moon. That's just out. And coming up next year at the end of the year is Ancient Aliens on Mars. So those are the four, and one co-authored with Richard and three on my own. And
the others are your own books that you've written by yourself, right?
Yeah, I just, Richard just works a bit slowly, and I have things I want to say and things I want to get out, and I can just bang them out much quicker, myself. It's not that I wouldn't love to have him co-author with me, but he's a very deliberate writer. He's a very deliberate researcher. He takes longer than I can stand, and I just every so often have things to say,
yeah.
And I realize there's an Ancient Aliens audience out there that's brand new, that doesn't know a lot of the stuff that was in Dark Mission and a lot of the stuff that came before in his book, like the Monuments of Mars. So, I just thought it was important to write books that are shorter and less technical and more accessible to a younger audience. So that's kind of where I've been focusing the last few years.
Yeah, I do understand your position on that, and I do appreciate that. And I got to tell you, your books, I think they're really ideal and they're really unique. I mean, you got plenty of books out there about the pyramids and other monuments here on Earth, and you do have the books about monuments on Mars and even on the Moon, or cities on the Moon and stuff, but you don't. Yours is the only one that connects the Ancient Aliens with these cities on the Moon and Mars, in other words. So
I mean, that was my intent, was to get the Ancient Aliens audience to appreciate that there's a whole bunch of stuff not just on the Earth, which is what Ancient Aliens, the TV show focuses on, but also that there's ancient ruins all over the Moon and all over Mars, and I suspect pretty much all over the solar system. And, that's really the de facto proof, because you can argue all day long that men may have been able to build the pyramids, or somehow may have put together the stones of Pumapunku. You can argue that, but, if you find one artificial pyramid on the moon, or one giant glass tower on the moon, or one sculptured face on Mars, the argument's pretty much over and the ancient alien theory is proven. So that's really the area that I'm the most interested in.
Right. Now, also, one of the things I was going to be interested in getting around to, and I'm probably jumping the gun, is do you think there's any bases in use by extraterrestrial beings on the moon or Mars, either one today that we're just not aware of? We haven't got to that particular area of the planet yet or something?
Well, I don't think it's that we haven't gotten to that particular area. I just think we the photographs are doctored and they're just not taken of certain areas. I suspect that some of the bases are ours, some of the bases are ET, and I suspect that they're active. I mean, the moon would be a perfect launching point if you were doing reconnaissance of the planet Earth, if you were even, coming all the way down and having direct contact with human beings, which has been alleged by a lot of the abduction authors and so forth, then, the moon's the ideal place to have a base, a way station, and, Mars would be like kind of a way station from wherever they came from. So all of these areas are definitely possibilities, but I haven't, it's hard to take a look at something. You can look at something and you can see that it's artificial, whether it's on the moon or on Mars. But, most of the time they appear to be in ruins. They appear to be very old and not active. But, you never know. There could be plenty of places there that are active.
Okay, and real quick, Mike, before I forget, because I know me, I'll get wrapped up in conversation and this won't get out. They can learn a lot more about you and your books and everything you got going on at your website. I believe it's www.mikebara.com or...
Actually, no, that one's not active anymore. I now have a blog. It's mikebara.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And no www. And you can just go to Google and type in my name, and it's spelled B-A-R-A. So just type in Mike Bara, B-A-R-A, and my blog is probably the first link that comes up. First or second link, and you can also find links to that on my Facebook page. I have an official author page there on Facebook too, because I'm all loaded up with friends. Or even through my Twitter account, you should be able to find it. So I'm pretty much all over the web. You can find me pretty easily. Go to my YouTube channel, and again, just type in my name, and all that stuff comes up on Google, so it's not really a problem.
Okay. Also, for those wanting to ask questions, the call-in number is 832-632-7904. And if you scroll below the chat room, you'll see a full description of him, as well as his books, as well as links to Amazon. Now, these won't be on this page tomorrow because I'm moving my next guest on here tomorrow, but I will be moving this page to the archives along with today's show and along with the same description and everything you need to know about him. So all you have to do is go over there and listen to it if you didn't catch it today, and click on the books if you're interested, or click on his website, and you can get in touch with him. And, please feel free to call in and ask any questions you may have. Mike, I think it's a good place to start this off, since I jumped the gun, would probably be, why don't you tell us a little something about the ancient aliens on the moon and what all you got covered inside of this book?
Well, this is it's a new book that's covering, essentially what I wanted to do was to, again, bring the young audience up to speed on what people like Richard Hoagland and John Lear, have been talking about for decades, that's on the moon. Basically, obvious evidence of artificial structures, that kind of thing. So I wanted to bring people up to speed on that, and also show them some things that we didn't get a chance to get into Dark Mission, for instance, and show them some newly discovered stuff. There's some really fascinating artificial structures on the far side of the moon, which I cover in the book, and there's tons of pictures. And also, let people know one other thing. If you do go to my blog, mikebara.blogspot.com, there's a tab there that says photos, and if you click on that, there's a link to a web album where I have all of the images from ancient aliens on the moon in high resolution, because you lose a certain amount of quality when you go from high resolution digital to print. There's just no way you can't lose it. And I've heard a couple of people on Amazon have reviews where they're complaining that they couldn't really tell from the pictures what I was talking about. But you can certainly tell if you go to the photo gallery and look up the stuff. Look up the stuff right there. So Basically, it covers a lot of new things. It covers things that are on the backside of the moon. For instance, there's a pyramidal object that I call the Daedalus ziggurat near the crater Daedalus. And there's a big controversy that's been going on back and forth between me and a guy who works for NASA about the veracity and reality of the image. And so that's kind of some interesting stuff. And there's some amazing things that people like Alan Stern have found on the rim of the crater Copernicus, for instance. Copernicus, there's this whole vast complex of artificial stuff. There's places where the skin of the moon has been torn apart, and you can see substructures. You can see what's obviously beams and girders and machinery in the shadows and buried inside this stuff. And it's really, really quite phenomenal and completely obvious. And so there's all kinds of interesting, cool stuff that hasn't been on the web before.
Okay. Now, was that the moon that I believe I've read about at the Enterprise website that has a Crystal City or the remnants of a Crystal City?
Yeah, and what we talk about in I think it's chapter 4 of Dark Mission is the crystal, what I call the crystal towers of the moon. And essentially what happened was that Richard Hoagland discovered back in the mid-90s that from enhancing images that he'd gotten not only from NASA, scanning actual photographic negatives and prints, and also getting stuff from Ken Johnston's personal collection of first-generation films. But if you enhanced or lightened up the background, what you could see is these towering, very geometric glass structures over the surface of the moon, sometimes going 20 or 30 miles high into the sky and having this very obvious sort of box-like kind of structures. And what I argue in this book is that those crystal towers of the moon are sort of a meteor shield, because they would effectively act as if the moon had an atmosphere. So it would protect any bases down below from meteor impacts. So, this is one of the things that's kind of a controversial argument, but I think the evidence is overwhelmingly there that these large glass structures, these towering glass structures, do exist on the surface of the moon. And it's one of the things I cover pretty extensively in Ancient Aliens.
So this is something that, from the sounds of things, what you said earlier and what you're saying now, that evidently NASA knows that ET's up there, and they probably even they're working with them on some kind of project that we're not exactly privy to. Would that be kind of the impression you're getting?
Yeah, I think that they clearly knew this stuff was there, and they would have had to have known it because they would have had to be able to sort of navigate through, the punch holes in this stuff. Because the thing about glass, especially lunar glass, is that since there's no moisture on the moon, in a vacuum environment, it doesn't shatter the way terrestrial glass does. It's actually two times stronger than steel. So essentially what you're talking about is it would be, at speed thousands of miles per hour, if something as flimsy as a lunar module hits one of these glass structures, it would basically splatter like a bug on a windshield. So they had to, have pretty well mapped and know where these areas were. I talk about the case in the Ancient Aliens on the Moon. I talk about the case of Surveyor 4, where it suddenly just ceased to exist while it was descending over Sinus Medii, the region in the middle of the moon, which is where Hoagland has always argued that there are these glass structures. And I think it just did exactly that. It went splat like a bug on a windshield. And that's the reason why it disappeared. So, it brings up kind of an interesting story, which is the story of Apollo 11. And if you remember when they were descending to the moon, they always talk about it in all these shows. They had this computer alarm that went off, and it was a 1202 alarm. And there's always these very famous discussions where Buzz Aldrin talks about the computer was overloaded with data, and it shut down and it gave us an error. And there was a while there where they weren't sure what the error was, and they were very, very close to simply abandoning, aborting the entire landing because they didn't know what the computer was trying to tell them. Well, it turns out that the reason the computer was overloaded was because the lunar module had two different radars. It had a side-looking, quote, rendezvous radar and a downward-looking descent radar. And on descent, Buzz Aldrin was only supposed to turn on one of them, which is the descent radar. And now, if you buy the conventional NASA explanation that the moon is airless, that there's no towering glass structures, that there's nothing in the sky that you can't see above the mountaintops, the rounded, soft, rolling hills of the moon, then there's no reason for a side-looking rendezvous radar to be turned on. But Aldrin turned it on, and that's what overloaded the computer. And the reason he turned it on, I think, is because they weren't entirely positive whether they were going to run into some remnants of these giant collapsed glass structures that were up there, and he wanted to make sure that they didn't hit anything that they weren't supposed to hit on the way down. And I think that's definitely what overloaded the computer. And it's just really an interesting case where you put together all these little pieces, you know, statements the astronauts made, where they were when they made the statements, discussions like on Apollo 11, Gene Cernan talking about, wow, we're really down among them now, and they're at 50,000 feet above the lunar surface. Like, how could you be down among anything at 10 miles above the lunar surface, you know, because there's no 10-mile-high mountains on the moon. It just doesn't make any sense unless you put it together in the full context of there being these gigantic glass structures, which, as I said, I think are a meteor shield.
So do you think maybe when they sent that bomb up there to the moon to supposedly check for water and they heard a metallic ring, that it was hitting something it wasn't supposed to?
Yeah, and it just basically just disappeared like a rock into a mud puddle, you know, it just basically disappeared. But when NASA, this is interesting because this is the very last two photographs in the book, when NASA actually released the image, they said that they were trying to get a plume of ice, they hoped what would be ice, you know, up into the sky that they would then be able to fly through with the other part of the Occult spacecraft and take a spectral analysis and see if it was just dirt or if there was actually water ice there. But instead, the thing just disappeared, just went plop. And so NASA went on this kind of wild search to try to find if there had been some sort of plume and they had just missed it. They were very surprised by the results. And when they actually enlarged and lightened up and enhanced the areas, what they found was a hole punched in the surface of the moon. And in the holes, you can see these very geometric 90-degree angle, again, beams and girders underneath the surface of the moon. The substructure, an artificial substructure there is what it clearly shows. And, you know, so basically I think what happened was that so-called bombing, you know, part of the spacecraft actually just punched a hole through the very thin skin and ended up crashing into these abandoned old artificial structures. I mean, literally it looked like the Krell base in the underground Krell structures from the movie Forbidden Planet. That's what it looked like. And I think it probably surprised quite a few people at that.
So it was, yeah, I would think so. I was thinking a minute ago, pardon me, that for a minute it was sounding like perhaps there was like an underground city up there on the moon or something like that. But
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's basically what happened is they crashed through a very thin sort of superficial structure and ended up kind of getting buried deep inside this massive underground base.
So if that's the case, then do we really have a means of knowing if the whole complete satellite is natural or if it's manufactured by ET in ancient times?
Well, the thing is that the samples that we brought back from the lunar surface do indicate that because of the titanium isotopic ratios indicate that it is made from the same stuff as the Earth. In fact, it's made from the so-called light mantle material. And this is actually something I cover in Chapter 1 of Ancient Aliens on the Moon is where did it really come from? Is it completely artificial or is it partially natural? And the most, you know, logical, one of the arguments that's been made is that it was fissioned away from the Earth at some point, that it basically spun off of the Earth. And the theory is that it was done when it was in sort of a solid state. I think it was spun off when we were still kind of in a molten state. And so that's why it's made from all the upper crust stuff, of the Earth. And then I think what happened is, lots and lots of different people, for want of a better phrase, extraterrestrials, and I think possibly even a very advanced earlier version of the human race, went up there and started building stuff on top of it and building sort of a fake facade on the outside and constructing their bases, digging underground. I think it's a modified natural satellite, to answer your question, short way.
Okay. That's probably not the only one that's up there. I gather from reading some of y'all's website, actually specifically from reading Richard's. I need to go more further in depth into yours on the, if you've done any work on the JFET, I think it was the name of the satellite. The Cassini took a picture of it, but it came out to be like a frozen Star Wars Death Star, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. You're talking about Iapetus, which is this is a Moon with a View, Richard's articles from a few years ago. Yeah, it's a gigantic dodecahedron is what it looks like. If you look at the horizon, instead of a curved horizon, it has a sharp angled horizon, and it's completely different than any other satellite in the solar system. And it very clearly shows all kinds of signs of being an artificial satellite. And that is a completely different story, in my opinion, than the moon. Now, until we get more pictures of that, or we actually go there and visit and land and look around a little bit, that one's going to be harder to confirm. And again, I don't trust anything that comes out of NASA anymore. Really, I think that they digitally alter quite a bit of information to make sure that there's no smoking gun evidence of anything artificial, but that doesn't mean it's not really there. So, Iapetus is a fascinating case, but I don't think that our moon is like that. I think it's a natural satellite that has been modified, added to, that kind of thing.
So, in our moon's case, then, you have to ask yourself a question: what does NASA have going on with an extraterrestrial race that they don't want us to know about, and who else are they keeping this information from? I mean, are they sharing with the government? Are they sharing with the military? Or, are they just keeping all the information all to themselves?
Yeah, well, NASA is a, division of the Department of Defense, and it says right in the Congressional Act that created NASA that anything that might be deemed, worthy of national security interest gets reported to the Pentagon and the President, and they have the final word on whether to put it out or not. NASA has no freedom. I'm sure they've discovered life on Mars. I'm sure they've discovered lots of artificial stuff, and they do not have the right or the privilege to put that information out to the American people. They simply aren't allowed to do that. It's all has to go through the Department of Defense and the White House, and that was established very early on.
Okay, so really when you go looking at secrecy, it's not all totally on NASA. They have another unit they have to answer to. But yet then too,
right.
Some of it probably rides on them, but not all of it.
Right, and many of the most prominent NASA scientists, people like Dr. Stephen Squires, they all have DARPA security clearances and DARPA email addresses, Defense and Advanced Resources projects. What's the name of the agency? I forget. But anyway, they're all basically under the thumb of the defense intelligence agencies, and they work for them. And I think even if they wanted to bring some of this information out, which I doubt that they do very seriously, but even if they wanted to, they really wouldn't be able to put it out without the approval of their masters, and I just don't think that that's going to happen.
Right. So.
In other words, I'm not a believer in the disclosure crowd. I think the disclosure crowd are just crazy. I don't think that's going to happen.
They're kind of like dreamers.
Yeah, I think it's really just Pollyannish. It's just not really something that's going to happen, because you have to understand, if you start putting information like this out, what you're going to do is destabilize the political situation. And what president who's at the top of the political situation is going to, if he destabilizes things, the only place he has to go is down. In other words, there's no advantage to political leaders putting out the truth about things like this, because if they did, the most likely result is that they will be removed from power, or they will be held accountable, or something bad will happen to them. So where's the motivation? There just really isn't any. Why would anybody at NASA admit to having lied to the American people for 60 years if it meant that they were going to go to jail, which is a distinct possibility? They really wouldn't. So I just don't see how you create a situation unless there's some sort of major seismic shift in our way of thinking and our way of dealing with this kind of thing. That I don't think there's any chance that there's going to be any official disclosure. I think it's just going to be, eventually
more
sort of nudge, wink. Well, nudge, wink, wink. Say no more. Everybody knows what's up there, kind of thing.
Would you care to venture a guess as to what kind of collusion or partnership they might be having up there with ET?
I don't have a clue. And, I'm working on a new project where we may maybe try to get to the bottom of that more. I really can't tell you about that, but I will be able to in the summer. But right now, all I can say is that, I think that, you hear these rumors that there are certain groups that are working with ETs, and there are certain groups that are fighting the ETs, and who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, who's wearing the white hats, who's wearing the black hats. I really don't know. It's very complicated stuff. What I can tell you is that I do think that government is not, people think of the government as one thing, but what really all these different agencies, they're corporations. They're actually set up as corporate entities. They're registered. They have Dun and Bradstreet numbers, because they have corporate credit ratings. States do, governments do, agencies like the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy and so forth. So they are really, it's a whole bunch of little fiefdoms that are sort of fighting over all this information and trying to find out the truth themselves.
So in the end, it's going to all roll back down to money.
Well, I don't know if it'll roll back down to money, but I think that they will not put out any information unless they're to. I think if you had a situation like the French Revolution where it was the truth of the guillotine, you might start getting the truth out of some of these guys. But really, and this is what I talk about in my second book, In the Choice, there's so much intensity, so much change energy going on right now that we may end up there. I don't know. And I'm not necessarily advocating it, but, there's definitely a lot of conflict right now in our country. And, who knows what kind of shifts. I do expect pretty big shifts in our monetary system and in our means of government over the next 10 years especially. And who knows where we're going to end up. I really am not sure.
Right. I'll be honest with you. If you ask me, the only way you'll ever get any kind of disclosure out of that is if one of these private sectors that's not affiliated with NASA in any way, somebody really rich can afford to make their own trip to the moon or Mars, and they blow a whistle and bring back video and pictures.
Yeah, but I don't think that they would be allowed to make it there. One of the things Richard Hoagland talked about a lot is the idea of a secret space program, and I think that they've got very advanced spacecraft that are way beyond the commercial, conventional stuff that we see in public. And I think if somebody went to go to the moon or to Mars with the intent of, putting out the real stuff, I don't think that probe or that spacecraft would ever make it back. So, I think everybody's kind of in on the plan, and they all are convinced, I believe most of them are convinced that they're doing it for the public good, that this would not be something that would be beneficial to the human race to know this stuff openly and honestly in front of the entire world, because we did a study called the Brookings Report back in the late 1950s, again, right after NASA came into creation. And it basically said, look, if you find artifacts, if you find exactly the kind of thing we're talking about, if you find evidence of ancient aliens on the moon, you probably shouldn't tell anybody about it, because if you do, it will drive them crazy. It will drive the world nuts. We will all go crazy and society could collapse. Or actually, I think the word they used was disintegrated. So I think a lot of the cases, the secrecy is based on this concept that, it's the best thing for all of us to not know the truth. It's better for us to be kept in the dark for our own good.
Okay. Well, be honest, I'm not exactly trusting like some people would be about it's for our own good. Even if it was, I've always had trouble with secrecy myself, and it seems to me like people that are so secretive usually ain't out for anybody's good but their own.
Yeah, exactly. And you're from Texas too, right? You're a Texan, so of course you're not down with that. You live in the Republic of Texas, so why would you be?
Now, on your book, you got pictures in both of them from your website or that you've accumulated to give demonstrations of what you're talking about, don't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. All the pictures that are in the book are in my Picasso web album, which again you can get through my blog at mikebara.blogspot.com. So every single picture's there. And the same thing's going to happen with Ancient Aliens on Mars when that comes out. All the pictures are going to be put there in full resolution so everybody can see them, in an even clearer fashion than they would be able to just from reading it in the book. So that's the idea, to make sure you got it in 2 or 3 different formats so everybody can see what I'm talking about.
Okay, well, I want to ask you this. I'm afraid I may not have done such a excellent job with the book that you and Hoagland were co-authors on. Was that Dark Missions or Dark Secrets or?
It is Dark Mission: The Secret History of NASA, and that was a book Richard and I wrote in 2007, and then in 2010 I wrote The Choice, which is about using conscious thought to use the physics of the mind, the physics of the real physics of the universe to change the outcome, to change the reality of the 2012 era that we're going to be in for the next, probably 10 years still of change. And then the new book is Ancient Aliens on the Moon. That's just out. And coming up next year at the end of the year is Ancient Aliens on Mars. So those are the four, and one co-authored with Richard and three on my own. And
the others are your own books that you've written by yourself, right?
Yeah, it's just that, Richard just works a bit slowly, and I have things I want to say and things I want to get out, and I can just bang them out much quicker, myself. It's not that
Aliens on the Moon and Ancient Aliens on Mars, which we'll be talking about tonight, which I believe are his most recent books, and he tells me that Ancient Aliens on Mars is not out yet, but he can share a little bit about it. I'm not sure as to how much, and I believe that Ancient Aliens on the Moon is out, and I think it's going to be a very interesting evening. This is a man that has a lot of information to offer. Him and Hoagland have both done a ton of research work about the monuments on Mars and crystal cities. I think it is on Mars and the Moon, or one or the other, and I haven't read it in a while, so I'm probably getting mixed up. So I'm going to let him correct me on any mistakes that I make. But right now, why don't we bring him into the conversation and get the ball on the road? So, Mike, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Royce. I was just sitting here watching myself on the Ancient Aliens marathon all day long. There's nothing that strokes your ego more than watching yourself on TV. Let me just tell you.
I really enjoyed watching that. Me and my son Royce watched all of those episodes both times around. And I thought you did excellent work in that one. But I would love to have him co-author with me. But he's a very deliberate writer. He's a very deliberate researcher. He takes longer than I can stand, and I just every so often have things to say. Yeah.
And I realize there's an Ancient Aliens audience out there that's brand new that doesn't know a lot of the stuff that was in Dark Mission and a lot of the stuff that came before in his book, like the Monuments of Mars. So I just thought it was important to write books that are shorter and less technical and more accessible to a younger audience. So that's kind of where I've been focusing the last few years.
Yeah, I do understand your position on that, and I do appreciate that. And I got to tell you, your books, I think they're really ideal and they're really unique. I mean, you got plenty of books out there about the pyramids and other monuments here on Earth, and you do have the books about monuments on Mars and even on the Moon, or cities on the Moon and stuff. But you don't. Yours is the only one that connects the Ancient Aliens with these cities on the Moon and Mars, in other words. So
I mean that was my intent, was to get the Ancient Aliens audience to appreciate that there's a whole bunch of stuff not just on the Earth, which is what Ancient Aliens, the TV show focuses on, but also that there's ancient ruins all over the Moon and all over Mars, and I suspect pretty much all over the solar system. And that's really the de facto proof, because you can argue all day long that men may have been able to build the pyramids, or they somehow may have put together the stones of Pumapunku. You can argue that, but, if you find one artificial pyramid on the Moon, or one giant glass tower on the Moon, or one sculptured face on Mars, the argument's pretty much over, and the Ancient Alien theory is proven. So that's really the area that I'm the most interested in.
Right. Now, also, one of the things I was going to be interested in getting around to, and I'm probably jumping the gun, is do you think there's any bases in use by extraterrestrial beings on the Moon or Mars, either one today that we're just not aware of? We haven't got to that particular area of the planet yet or something?
Well, I don't think it's that we haven't.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me tonight are, of course, my two co-hosts who have been graciously helping me out over the last several weeks, John Strohbehn and John Riggins. And also my guest tonight's going to be Mike Bara, who is a returning guest, and quite frankly, he's always a pleasure. He's the co-author of, I want to say it's either Dark Secrets or Dark Missions of NASA, that was wrote with him and Richard Hoagland, and I keep getting the title of that particular book mixed up, so I'm going to get him to correct me on it here in a minute. But the ones I don't mix up is the ones that he's authored himself, The Choice, and also he's authored